In this video, we're going to be learning about sewing flat lace to fabric. Now this is an heirloom lace, so it's 97% cotton and 3% nylon, which is typical for most of our cotton heirloom laces. These laces have a header thread at the top, so that you can see this is the scalloped outer side of the lace. And then the top of the lace, where you see this heavier looking line, that's actually several rows of threads that are, you're able to pull on those threads to gather. So it is referred to as the header threads. So when we are doing heirloom sewing and we're stitching down, we're going to want to sew right through those header threads to attach it to the fabric. And as I mentioned, you can pull on one of the threads or several of the threads in the header to gather it up, which is what I will need to do at a couple places on this pattern. I have starched my lace, which makes it much more, you have to be much more careful with gathering because it's stiffer, but it is always easier to work with these cotton laces if you're going to, if you starch them ahead of time. So I typically will starch very heavily and hang it over the rod at the bathtub, let it dry, and then I'll press it. Now if you were going to do a lot of gathering, you do not want to put starch on it because that will make it extremely difficult to gather. But I am using the Smocked Tapered Bonnet pattern by Lori Anderson. If you are a member of the Saga We Care Facebook group, she has generously donated this pattern for us to use to coordinate with the little girl preemie gowns that we make. And so I'm making a size 3/4 pound to go with a preemie gown that I have constructed and smocked. She also sells this pattern in regular infant sizes on her website. So if you like this and you enjoy making a little tiny one, certainly consider purchasing her pattern from her website and make it for the little babies in your life. I have my fabric here that I'm going to attach it to, and you can see I'm going to go up one side, across here, and then across the top of the bonnet as it tapers, and then down the other side. And I did need to gather this a little bit so that it will go around the corner, and around the corner it will still look flat. If I try to just stitch this around the corner, that's not going to work very well. So I do need to pull the thread to gather this at the corner, but the rest of it will be attached flat. If you're accustomed to tearing your fabric, which most of us do for smocked things, you end up with these little hairy ends. You want to trim those little hairs off the front of the bonnet so that it will be easier to attach the lace. You'll see that when we get to the other steps. So you can see here that I've gathered the lace a little bit to go around this first corner of the bonnet, and then it will be sewn flat, and so I am carefully maneuvering and sliding these gathers up a little bit so that it can remain flat as it goes around this second corner. I'm using 60 weight thread and a size 70 needle for this. And I've set my straight stitch to a 2.0 to stitch this lace to the bonnet. And I also have my needle set so that it will stay in the fabric when I stop, because that will make it easier to pivot around this corner. So I'm adjusting that gathered section so that as I come to it, the lace will stay out of the way of the needle. ease around this corner here. And your lace is facing inwards towards the bonnet. This is the right side of the bonnet, and the lace is facing inwards as we stitch it flat. And it's about 1/8 of an inch away from the outside edge of the fabric. So I need to do the same thing for this second corner. Arrange it so that the gathers are at the corner and the needle stays down in the fabric. May have been a little aggressive on my gathers here, we'll see. So continue sewing across the front of your fabric here, and then I will pivot at the other corners. I'll gather up the lace at those corners as I get there. So the lace is stitched on, and you can see where I have to turn the corner here. That little bit of gathering to give it that extra fullness allows it to stay flat as you turn the corner. So the next step in the process is to do a zigzag stitch. And in heirloom sewing, if you were doing this by hand, it would be called a roll and whip. So what we're going to want to do is set the machine to a zigzag stitch, and you want the swing of the zigzag can be like a 4.0 is fine. You want to shorten the stitch length to about a 1.0. And for this stitch, you want the left swing of the needle again to go right through this header thread, and then the right swing of the needle needs to go off the fabric. And what that will do is gently roll it towards the fabric. Pivoting to turn the corner here. And this just tightens up that seam. On my needle, I have a little red line on the foot of my machine, and I am keeping the header thread aligned, keeping it so that it travels right underneath that red line, because that is where the left swing of the zigzag stitch is going. So on your machine, you'll need to figure out where to align this header thread that you've stitched down so that you can get the same results. So you can see here how nice and tight this rolled section is. It's finished off the outside edge and rolled it up very nice and tight to finish off that seam. Then the last stitch is optional. I call it the scotch tape stitch. And what that does is it's a little tiny zigzag stitch that is done so that on the right swing, the needle will go just off the edge of the fabric, and the left swing, it will go just onto the fabric. And what that does is it holds this little tiny seam allowance to the back so that it doesn't roll forward. See how if it rolls forward, it affects the look of the lace. So if you keep that rolled to the back, it does not. So for that, I set the stitch width at about a 1.5 and the stitch length to a 1.0. So here you've got it. You can see that the seam allowance is nicely tucked to the underside of the fabric, and I don't have to worry about that flipping forward. And the little tiny zigzag stitches are nearly invisible. So there you have it. That's your attaching flat lace to flat fabric. Again, you first do a straight stitch, Then you do a zigzag stitch to roll and whip, and then you can do your scotch tape stitch to secure the seam allowance to the wrong side of the fabric so that the lace is visible. If you enjoyed this and don't want to miss out on any more videos, please consider subscribing to my channel.